Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad. About the author. Joseph Conrad was a Polish-British novelist and one of the most influential writers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He is known for his rich, complex narratives that explore themes such as imperialism, colonialism, the human condition, and moral ambiguity. Conrad began writing in English, his third language, and his first novel, Almayer's Folly, was published in 1895. He went on to write numerous novels, novellas, and short stories that explored complex themes and showcased his mastery of narrative technique. Some of his most famous works include Heart of Darkness, Lord Jim, and Nostromo. Conrad's writing is known for its focus on the darker aspects of human nature, including moral ambiguity, existential questioning, and the effects of colonialism and imperialism. Conrad's style is characterized by rich, evocative prose and intricate narrative structures, often using unreliable narrators and shifting perspectives. His narratives often involve complex characters and settings, exploring the psychological and philosophical depths of his subjects. Conrad's work received critical acclaim during his lifetime and continues to be studied and appreciated for its depth and complexity. His influence extends beyond literature, as his themes and ideas have been the basis for discussions on imperialism, colonialism, and the human condition. Joseph Conrad passed away on August 3, 1924, in England, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most important and innovative writers of his time. His works continue to resonate with readers and scholars for their insightful exploration of human nature and the challenges of the modern world. Significance of the title. The title, Heart of Darkness, holds significant meaning and symbolism within Joseph Conrad's novella. It refers to multiple aspects of the narrative and themes explored throughout the story. The title can be interpreted as referring to the geographical location of the African Congo, which is often considered the central, unexplored, and mysterious part of the African continent. For European colonizers, it was an area filled with darkness, both in terms of the dense and unknown jungle and their ignorance of the native cultures. The title symbolizes the darkness within the human soul and the potential for evil that exists in all individuals. Throughout the novella, Conrad explores how unchecked ambition, greed, and the pursuit of power can lead to moral decay and a descent into madness, as seen in the character of Kurtz. Marlowe's journey up the Congo River is also a journey into the depths of his own psyche, where he is confronted with the darker aspects of humanity and the reality of colonial exploitation. The title can be seen as a metaphor for the darkness brought about by colonial exploitation. The European colonizers impose their will on the African land and people, causing destruction and suffering. This darkness is evident in the treatment of the indigenous population and the moral corruption of the colonizers. The title suggests an ambiguous and dual meaning, reflecting the complexity of the human experience and the elusive nature of truth. Conrad uses the contrast between light and darkness throughout the novella to symbolize the duality of civilization and savagery, and the tension between what is known and unknown. The title can also be seen as a critique of the so-called civilizing mission of European powers in Africa. Instead of bringing enlightenment and progress, the colonizers bring darkness in the form of exploitation and moral decay. Heart of Darkness is a title that encapsulates the central themes and narrative of the novella. It serves as a multifaceted symbol representing the physical, moral, and psychological darkness that Marlowe encounters on his journey. The title challenges the reader to consider the complexities of human nature and the impact of colonialism on both the colonized and the colonizers. Summary of the novel, Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad, is a novella that follows the journey of the protagonist, Charles Marlowe, as he navigates the complexities of colonialism and human nature. Marlowe's narrative is framed within another story, as he recounts his experiences to fellow passengers on a boat anchored on the River Thames. Heart of Darkness 1899 is a novella in which the sailor Charles Marlowe tells his listeners the story of his assignment as steamer captain for a Belgian company in the African interior. The novel is widely regarded as a critique of European colonial rule in Africa, whilst also examining the themes of power dynamics and morality. Although Conrad does not name the river on which most of the narrative takes place, at the time of writing, the Congo Free State, the location of the large and economically important Congo River, was a private colony of Belgium's King Leopold II. Marlowe is given a text by Kurtz, an ivory trader working on a trading station far up the river, who has gone native, and is the object of Marlowe's expedition. Central to Conrad's work is the idea that there is little difference between civilized people and savages. Heart of Darkness implicitly comments on imperialism and racism. The novella's setting provides the frame for Marlowe's story of his fascination for the prolific ivory trader Kurtz. Conrad draws parallels between London, the greatest town on earth, and Africa as places of darkness. Originally issued as a three-part serial story in Blackwood's magazine to celebrate the 1000th edition of the magazine, Heart of Darkness has been widely republished and translated in many languages. It provided the inspiration for Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 film Apocalypse Now. In 1998, the Modern Library ranked Heart of Darkness 67th on their list of the 100 best novels in English of the 20th century. Part 1. The novella opens with a frame narrative on a boat, the Nellie, anchored on the Thames River. Marlowe begins telling his story to the other passengers on the boat, setting the stage for his journey. Marlowe, a seasoned seaman, secures a position as the captain of a steamboat for the Belgian Trading Company in the Congo. He describes his curiosity and excitement about traveling to Africa and exploring the unknown. Marlowe departs from Europe and arrives at a coastal station in Africa. He witnesses the beginning of the exploitation of the African people and the land, as well as the inefficiencies and disorganization of the colonial enterprise. Marlowe travels inland to reach the central station, where he learns that his steamboat has been damaged and requires repairs. He hears about Kurtz, a legendary and mysterious ivory trader known for his influence over the indigenous people. Marlowe observes the mistreatment of the African workers, the colonial brutality, and the chaos at the stations. These experiences challenge his initial expectations and begin to reveal the darker aspects of colonialism. Part 2. At the central station, Marlowe meets the manager, who is envious of Kurtz and wants to maintain control over the ivory trade. The manager's insincerity and jealousy of Kurtz become evident. Marlowe also meets the brickmaker, who is a sycophant and represents the colonial desire for power and advancement. After repairing the steamboat, Marlowe embarks on a journey up the river to meet Kurtz. He encounters various challenges along the way, including hostile natives and dense fog. Marlowe becomes increasingly intrigued by Kurtz and his reputation. He hears conflicting reports about Kurtz, some praising him and others condemning him. The steamboat is attacked by a group of natives, resulting in the death of the helmsman. Marlowe manages to fend off the attack and continue the journey. Marlowe finally arrives at Kurtz's station, where he is shocked by the decaying surroundings and the heads of native people on stakes. He meets the Russian, who admires Kurtz and reveals more about his influence and actions. Part 3. Marlowe meets Kurtz, who is gravely ill and close to death. Despite his weakened state, Kurtz's presence and charisma are evident. Marlowe listens to Kurtz's ramblings and observes his declining mental state. Marlowe learns more about Kurtz's moral decay and the atrocities he has committed. Kurtz's lust for power and ivory has led him to exploit the indigenous people and commit violent acts. Kurtz's final words, the horror, reflect his realization of the darkness within himself and the consequences of his actions. Marlowe is deeply affected by Kurtz's death. Marlowe returns to Europe and visits Kurtz's intended, who is still in mourning. She asks Marlowe about Kurtz's final words, and he lies to her, telling her that Kurtz's last words were her name to spare her the pain of the truth. The novella ends with Marlowe's reflection on his journey and the darkness he encountered. He remains disillusioned by his experiences and the impact of colonialism. Overall, Heart of Darkness is a complex narrative that explores themes of imperialism, moral ambiguity, and the darkness within the human soul. Through Marlowe's journey and his encounters with Kurtz, Conrad critiques the destructive impact of colonialism and invites readers to reflect on the complexities of human nature. Critical analysis of the novel, Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad is a novella first published in 1899, set in the backdrop of colonial Africa. It explores themes such as imperialism, racism, the nature of power and its effects on the human psyche, as well as the complexities of the human condition. The novella employs a framed narrative structure, where Marlowe tells his story to an unnamed narrator and others on a boat. This allows for a layered perspective and invites the reader to question the reliability of Marlowe's account. The novella is rich in symbolism, particularly the contrast between light and darkness. The darkness in the title represents not only the physical darkness of the African jungle but also the moral and psychological darkness that lies within humans. Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad was written during a time of significant social and political changes in the world, particularly in the context of European colonialism in Africa. The novel's language and narrative style reflect these contexts and the prevailing attitudes of the time. The novel was written during the height of European imperialism and the scramble for Africa. European powers were expanding their territories in Africa, exploiting the continent's resources and peoples. The Belgian Congo, where the story is set, was known for its harsh and brutal exploitation of native populations. The prevalent attitudes of the time viewed non-European cultures as inferior and in need of civilization. Conrad critiques these attitudes through Marlowe's observations and experiences, but the novel itself also reflects some of the prejudices of its time. Conrad's novella exposes the brutal reality of colonial exploitation. The narrative describes the mistreatment of the indigenous African population, their forced labor, and the violence inflicted upon them by European colonizers. Heart of Darkness raises questions about the moral and existential implications of imperialism. It suggests that the unchecked pursuit of power and wealth leads to moral decay and loss of humanity, as seen in the character of Kurtz. Conrad uses symbolism extensively, particularly the contrast between light and darkness. The African jungle is depicted as a dark, enigmatic place, which serves as a metaphor for the unknown and the darkness within the human soul. The language in the novel is often ambiguous and layered, reflecting the complexity of the human experience. Conrad's use of ambiguous and often contradictory descriptions adds depth to the narrative and forces the reader to confront the complexity of colonial encounters. Marlowe's descriptions of the African environment and its people often reflect the ethnographic language of the time, which can be seen as both descriptive and condescending. Conrad uses this language to create an atmosphere of alienation and otherness. The novel's use of a framed narrative structure allows for multiple perspectives and levels of narration. This complexity in narrative style adds to the ambiguity and the questioning of truth and reliability in the story. Conrad's use of vivid imagery and descriptive language enhances the atmospheric quality of the novella. The dense jungle, the fog, and the river are all portrayed in detail, adding to the sense of mystery and danger. Heart of Darkness is a novel that operates within and against the social and political contexts of its time. Its language and narrative style reflect both a critique of and participation in the dominant attitudes towards imperialism and non-European cultures. The novel's enduring impact lies in its exploration of the moral complexities of power and the human psyche within the context of colonial exploitation. Some critics argue that Conrad's portrayal of Africa and its inhabitants is problematic and perpetuates colonial stereotypes. However, others believe that the novella's critique of imperialism and its focus on moral and existential dilemmas are still relevant today. The novel critiques the European colonial project in Africa, exposing its brutal reality. Through Marlowe's journey and observations, Conrad presents a scathing critique of the imperialist ideology, which claims to bring civilization and enlightenment to the African continent, but instead brings destruction and exploitation. Heart of Darkness has been critiqued for its portrayal of African characters. They are often depicted in a stereotypical manner, as primitive and savage, lacking agency and depth. Critics argue that the novella reinforces Eurocentric and racist attitudes prevalent during Conrad's time. The title of the novella suggests a deeper exploration of the human psyche. Kurtz, a central character, is portrayed as a figure who embodies the darkest aspects of humanity. His descent into madness and moral decay serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and unchecked ambition. Conrad's narrative style often blurs the line between reality and illusion, sanity and madness. This ambiguity serves to highlight the complexity of the human experience and the elusive nature of truth. Conrad's novella can be seen as a critique of the idea of progress, which was a dominant belief during the late 19th century. He challenges the notion that Western civilization is inherently superior and capable of bringing positive change to the world. Heart of Darkness is a complex and thought-provoking work that delves into the dark aspects of human nature and the consequences of imperialism. While its portrayal of Africa and Africans can be seen as troubling, it remains a seminal work in exploring the impact of colonialism and the human condition. It continues to be a significant text for understanding the intricacies of power, identity, and morality. Themes. Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad, explores several complex and interrelated themes that delve into the human psyche, colonialism, and the nature of power. Here is a detailed explanation of the novel's themes. Imperialism and colonialism. The novella serves as a critique of European imperialism and colonialism, particularly in Africa. Through Marlowe's journey, the reader is exposed to the brutal reality of the colonial enterprise, including the exploitation of the land and indigenous peoples. Conrad highlights the hypocrisy of the colonizers, who claim to bring civilization and progress to Africa but instead inflict violence and suffering on the local population. The darkness of the human psyche. The title, Heart of Darkness, suggests an exploration of the darkness within the human soul. Conrad examines the potential for evil that exists in all individuals, particularly when they are placed in positions of power. The character of Kurtz embodies the descent into madness and moral decay that can occur when unchecked ambition and power are allowed to flourish. His final words, the horror, suggest his realization of the darkness within himself. Racism and Eurocentrism. The novel reflects the racial attitudes of its time, portraying African characters as primitive and lacking depth or agency. Critics argue that the novella perpetuates colonial stereotypes and Eurocentric views of non-European cultures. At the same time, Conrad critiques the racism and arrogance of the colonizers through Marlowe's observations of their disregard for the lives and dignity of the indigenous people. Critique of Progress and Modernity. Heart of Darkness challenges the notion of progress and modernity, which were dominant beliefs during the late 19th century. Conrad questions the idea that Western civilization is inherently superior and capable of bringing positive change to the world. The novella suggests that the pursuit of progress, without moral and ethical considerations, can lead to destructive outcomes. Ambiguity and duality. Conrad's narrative style often blurs the line between reality and illusion, sanity and madness. This ambiguity serves to highlight the complexity of the human experience and the elusive nature of truth. The contrast between light and darkness is a recurring motif in the novella, symbolizing the duality of civilization and savagery, knowledge and ignorance. The corrupting influence of power. The novella examines the corrupting influence of power on individuals, particularly when it is unchecked. Kurtz's descent into madness and moral decay serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power. Marlowe's own experiences navigating the complexities of power and its effects on individuals add depth to the theme. Heart of Darkness is a rich and multifaceted work that explores the complexities of the human condition within the context of colonialism and imperialism. The novella's themes challenge the reader to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, racism, and the darkness within the human soul. Conrad's critique of imperialism and the impact of colonial exploitation remains relevant and thought-provoking. Characterization. In Heart of Darkness, by Joseph Conrad, the characters serve as vehicles for exploring the themes of the novella. The primary characters are complex and often ambiguous, reflecting the darkness and ambiguity of the narrative. Here is a detailed explanation of the major characters in the novel. Charles Marlowe. Marlowe is the protagonist and narrator of the novella. He serves as the reader's guide through his journey into the Congo and his encounters with various characters and situations. Marlowe is portrayed as introspective, thoughtful, and morally complex. His narrative provides insights into the horrors of colonialism and the darkness within the human soul. Marlowe's journey is not just physical but also psychological, as he confronts the darkness within himself and the world around him. Kurtz. Kurtz is a central and enigmatic figure in the novella. He is a European ivory trader who operates deep within the African jungle and gains a godlike status among the indigenous people. Kurtz is portrayed as a charismatic and ambitious individual who is initially driven by the desire for wealth and power. However, his unchecked ambition and isolation in the jungle lead to his descent into madness and moral decay. Kurtz's final words, the horror, suggest his realization of the darkness and corruption he has brought upon himself and the world. The Harlequin Russian trader. The Harlequin is a young Russian trader who admires Kurtz and serves as his disciple. He is colorful and naive, providing a contrasting perspective to Marlowe's more somber observations. He is loyal to Kurtz and is fascinated by his ideas, despite acknowledging Kurtz's madness. The manager. The manager of the central station is depicted as a cold and efficient bureaucrat. He lacks imagination and moral depth, focusing solely on the business of ivory trading. He represents the corporate aspect of colonialism, prioritizing profit over human life or ethical considerations. The intended. The intended is Kurtz's fiancée, whom Marlowe meets after returning to Europe. She is portrayed as idealistic and devoted to Kurtz, representing the romanticized and naive view of Kurtz held by those who do not know his true nature. Marlowe chooses not to reveal the full extent of Kurtz's moral downfall to her, protecting her from the truth and preserving her idealized image of Kurtz. The African characters. The indigenous African characters in the novella are often depicted as other, or background figures, lacking individual agency or voice. This portrayal reflects the racial attitudes of Conrad's time and has been criticized for perpetuating colonial stereotypes. The native characters serve to illustrate the consequences of colonial exploitation and the impact of the colonizers on the local population. The characters in Heart of Darkness play significant roles in exploring the themes of colonialism, power, and the human condition. Marlowe's journey and interactions with Kurtz, the Harlequin, the manager, and others provide a multi-layered narrative that delves into the complexities and ambiguities of the human experience. Q. 1. What do Kurtz's dying words, the horror, mean in Heart of Darkness? Or, why does Kurtz exclaim, the horror, in Heart of Darkness? Ans. Kurtz's exclamation, the horror, from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness is one of the most famous and enigmatic moments in the novella. These words can be interpreted in several ways and have different levels of significance within the context of the story. Kurtz's final words may represent a moment of self-awareness and regret as he confronts his impending death. He may be reflecting on the actions he took in the Congo, including the atrocities he committed and the exploitation of the indigenous people. The phrase suggests that Kurtz recognizes the darkness and moral corruption he has allowed to take over his life. Kurtz's exclamation could be a critique of the colonial enterprise itself, acknowledging the horrors of European colonialism in Africa. He may have realized the devastating impact his actions had on the land and people of the Congo. As Kurtz descends into madness, his final words could be an expression of his mental and emotional turmoil. His experiences in the jungle, combined with his unchecked ambition and isolation, may have led him to a state of profound horror at the reality of his situation. Kurtz's final words may signify an existential or metaphysical crisis as he grapples with the meaning of life, death, and his own legacy. The phrase can be seen as an acknowledgement of the darkness within the human soul and the ultimate futility of his pursuits. Kurtz is portrayed as a visionary, and his final exclamation may represent horror at his own insights and the consequences of his vision. His ideas and ambitions have led him down a path of destruction for himself and those around him. Kurtz's final words, the horror, are open to interpretation and encapsulate many of the central themes of Heart of Darkness, including the darkness of the human soul, the moral decay of unchecked power, and the horrors of colonialism. His exclamation is a haunting and thought-provoking moment in the novella that invites readers to ponder its meaning and implications. Q. 2. What is the significance of Kurtz's last words in Heart of Darkness and how does Marlowe interpret them? Ans. Kurtz's last words, the horror, from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, hold significant meaning in the context of the novella and are open to multiple interpretations. Marlowe's interpretation of Kurtz's final words plays an important role in shaping his understanding of the journey and the themes of the story. Kurtz's dying words may reflect a moment of self-awareness and realization of the moral and existential horror he has brought upon himself and others through his actions in the Congo. His unchecked ambition and lust for power led him to commit atrocities and exploit the indigenous population. The words may also represent Kurtz's acknowledgement of the horrors of the colonial enterprise in Africa. The exploitation, violence, and destruction of native cultures caused by European colonizers contribute to this sense of horror. Kurtz may be facing an existential crisis as he confronts the end of his life, questioning the meaning and value of his pursuits and the darkness within his own soul. The phrase can be interpreted as a universal expression of horror at the human condition and the dark potential of humanity, particularly in the context of the novella's themes of moral ambiguity and the corrupting influence of power. Marlowe is left to grapple with the meaning of Kurtz's final words. He reflects on the ambiguity and complexity of the phrase, which adds depth to his journey and understanding of the darkness he has encountered. Marlowe recognizes the depth of Kurtz's final words and their implications about the darkness of the human soul and the horrors of unchecked ambition and power. He sees Kurtz's demise as a cautionary tale about the moral and ethical pitfalls of colonialism. Kurtz's final words have a lasting impact on Marlowe, shaping his perspective on his journey and the events he witnessed. Marlowe becomes more introspective and critical of the colonial enterprise, and he carries the weight of Kurtz's words with him. Marlowe ultimately chooses not to share the full extent of Kurtz's last words with Kurtz as intended. This decision reflects Marlowe's struggle with the truth and his desire to protect the idealized image she holds of Kurtz. Kurtz's last words, "The horror. The horror," are a powerful and multifaceted statement that encapsulates the central themes of the novella. Marlowe's interpretation of these words adds depth to his journey and understanding of the complexities of human nature, power, and colonialism. These final words remain haunting and thought-provoking, challenging both Marlowe and the reader to confront the darkness within humanity and the world. Q3. How does Marlowe evolve in the novella Heart of Darkness? Ands. In Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Charles Marlowe undergoes a significant evolution throughout the novella as he navigates his journey into the African Congo and confronts the darkness of colonialism and the human soul. Marlowe's character development is shaped by his experiences and interactions with others, including Kurtz, and his reflections on the events he witnesses. At the beginning of the novella, Marlowe is portrayed as an adventurous and curious individual who is drawn to the unknown. He seeks a position as a steamboat captain in Africa to fulfill his desire for exploration and adventure. As Marlowe journeys into the Congo, he begins to witness the harsh realities of colonialism. He is disturbed by the mistreatment of the indigenous population and the exploitation of the land for ivory trading. Marlowe's encounters with the brutality of the colonial enterprise challenge his initial curiosity and idealism, leading him to question the motives and ethics of the colonizers. Marlowe's journey leads him to Kurtz, a legendary ivory trader known for his charisma and influence over the indigenous people. Marlowe is initially intrigued by Kurtz's reputation and is eager to meet him. Upon meeting Kurtz, Marlowe is both fascinated and horrified by Kurtz's descent into madness and moral decay. He recognizes Kurtz's brilliance but is disillusioned by the darkness Kurtz has embraced. Marlowe's interactions with Kurtz force him to confront deeper moral and existential questions about power, ambition, and the human soul. He grapples with the ambiguity of Kurtz's character and the horrors of colonialism. Marlowe's journey becomes a metaphorical journey into the darkness within himself as he reflects on the nature of humanity and his own role in the colonial enterprise. Marlowe's experiences in the Congo lead him to recognize the ambiguity and complexity of human nature and colonialism. He understands the need to navigate moral gray areas and make difficult decisions, such as when he chooses not to reveal Kurtz's final words to Kurtz as intended. By the end of the novella, Marlowe has evolved into a more cynical and detached individual. His journey has left him with a sense of disillusionment about the world and the people around him. Marlowe's encounter with the darkness of human nature and colonialism has a profound and lasting impact on him, shaping his perspective on life and his interactions with others. Marlowe's evolution in Heart of Darkness reflects his journey from curiosity and idealism to a more nuanced understanding of the complexities of human nature and the horrors of colonialism. His experiences and reflections led him to a deeper awareness of the darkness within the human soul and the moral ambiguities of power and ambition. This evolution shapes Marlowe's character and serves as a conduit for Conrad's critique of colonialism and exploration of existential themes. Q. 4. Does Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness criticize colonialism? Ans. Yes, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness can be seen as a critique of colonialism. The novella highlights the destructive impact of European colonialism in Africa and exposes the hypocrisy, brutality, and moral corruption of the colonial enterprise. Conrad portrays the violent and exploitative practices of the European colonizers in the Congo. The mistreatment of the indigenous population, the destruction of the natural environment, and the exploitation of resources for the sake of ivory trading all point to the negative consequences of colonialism. The novella reveals the hypocrisy of the colonizers, who claim to bring civilization and progress to Africa but instead inflict suffering and devastation. The supposed civilizing mission is exposed as a facade for greed and self-interest. Conrad questions the idea of Western civilization as superior and enlightened. The colonizers' actions contradict their self-proclaimed mission, showing the darkness and savagery present in their supposed civilization. Through the character of Kurtz, Conrad illustrates the moral corruption and decay that can result from unchecked ambition and power in a colonial context. Kurtz's descent into madness and his treatment of the indigenous people highlight the dehumanizing effects of colonialism. Marlowe, the narrator, becomes increasingly disillusioned by what he witnesses in the Congo. His reflections on the colonial enterprise suggest a critical stance toward the exploitative and inhumane practices of the European colonizers. While Heart of Darkness does criticize colonialism, Conrad presents the story with ambiguity and complexity. He does not offer clear-cut solutions or oversimplified judgments but instead explores the moral and ethical dilemmas of the colonial enterprise. Overall, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness can be interpreted as a powerful critique of colonialism, shedding light on the moral corruption, hypocrisy, and destructive impact of European colonization in Africa. Through the experiences of Marlowe and the character of Kurtz, Conrad invites readers to question the motives and consequences of imperialism and to reflect on the darkness within the human soul. Q. 5. What lie did Marlowe tell to Kurtz's fiancée in Heart of Darkness and why? Ans. In Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Marlowe meets Kurtz's intended, or fiancé, after returning from his journey in the Congo. During their conversation, Marlowe tells her a lie about Kurtz's final words. Kurtz's actual last words were, the horror. The horror. But Marlowe tells the intended that Kurtz's final words were her name. The intended holds an idealized and romanticized view of Kurtz. Marlowe understands that she deeply admires and loves Kurtz and sees him as a noble, almost heroic figure. By telling her that Kurtz's final words were her name, Marlowe seeks to preserve her image of Kurtz as a devoted and loving partner. He spares her the pain of knowing Kurtz's true final words and the darkness and moral decay he experienced. Marlowe recognizes the devastating impact the truth about Kurtz's final words and actions might have on the intended. She is already grieving, and hearing about Kurtz's descent into madness and his moral failings could cause her further anguish. By lying to her, Marlowe shields her from the harsh reality of Kurtz's actions in the Congo and his final moments of despair. Marlowe's decision to lie to the intended reflects the moral ambiguity and complexity of his character and the narrative as a whole. He grapples with the ethical implications of telling the truth versus sparing the intended's feelings. This decision underscores one of the central themes of the novella, the difficulty of discerning right from wrong in a morally ambiguous world. Marlowe's lie to Kurtz's intended is a pivotal moment in Heart of Darkness, highlighting his internal conflict and the ethical dilemmas he faces. His choice to lie serves as a commentary on the complexity of human relationships and the challenges of navigating truth and compassion in the face of harsh realities. By sparing the intended from the truth, Marlowe reveals his own struggle with the darkness he encountered and the toll it has taken on him. Q. 6. Discuss imperialism in Heart of Darkness. Ans. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness offers a complex and critical exploration of imperialism, particularly European colonialism in Africa. The novella provides a scathing critique of the impact of imperialism on both the colonizers and the colonized. Through the journey of the protagonist, Marlowe, and his encounters with other characters, including Kurtz, Conrad illustrates the moral, ethical, and existential consequences of imperialism. The primary motivation for imperialism in Heart of Darkness is the exploitation of natural resources, particularly ivory. The European colonizers are driven by greed and profit, often disregarding the well-being of the indigenous people and the environment. The novella portrays the moral and ethical decay of the colonizers, particularly through the character of Kurtz. His unchecked ambition and lust for power lead him to commit atrocities and exploit the indigenous population. The colonizers justify their actions by claiming to bring civilization and progress to Africa, but their behavior reveals a lack of ethical considerations and a descent into moral darkness. Conrad's depiction of the African people is often seen as problematic, reflecting the racist attitudes of the time. However, the novella also criticizes the colonizers' dehumanization and mistreatment of the indigenous population. The colonizers view the Africans as inferior and treat them as mere tools for labor, disregarding their humanity and cultural identity. The colonizers' claims of bringing civilization and enlightenment to Africa are exposed as hypocritical. Their actions contradict their supposed mission, revealing their true motives of exploitation and domination. This hypocrisy is evident in Marlowe's observations of the colonial bureaucracy, the violence inflicted on the indigenous population, and the corrupt practices of the European traders. The novella highlights the devastating impact of imperialism on the indigenous population. The destruction of their culture, land, and lives is a central theme in the story. Marlowe witnesses the suffering of the African people, including scenes of forced labor and brutal treatment, which illustrate the dehumanizing effects of imperialism. While Heart of Darkness criticizes imperialism, Conrad presents the story with ambiguity and complexity. Marlowe grapples with the moral and ethical dilemmas of his journey in the colonial enterprise. The novella invites readers to question the motives and consequences of imperialism and to reflect on the darkness within the human soul. In Heart of Darkness, Conrad provides a powerful critique of imperialism, exposing its greed, hypocrisy, and destructive impact on both the colonizers and the colonized. Through Marlowe's journey and his encounters with characters like Kurtz, the novella explores the moral, ethical, and existential questions raised by European colonialism in Africa. Q. 7. Discuss darkness in Heart of Darkness. Ans. In Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, darkness serves as a multifaceted symbol with multiple layers of meaning. It is central to the novella's themes and plays a significant role in shaping the narrative and characters' experiences. The physical darkness of the Congo rainforest and the night journey on the river represent a literal darkness that Marlowe experiences during his travels. Darkness symbolizes the unknown, the mysteries of the human soul, and the moral and ethical dilemmas encountered in the Congo. Darkness in the novella represents the unexplored and unknown territories, both geographically and psychologically. Marlowe ventures into the dark, uncharted heart of the African continent, where he encounters mysterious and unsettling experiences. Conrad uses darkness as a metaphor for the darkness within the human soul. Characters such as Kurtz embody the potential for moral decay and ethical corruption that can arise from unchecked ambition and power. Marlowe's journey becomes a confrontation with the darkness within himself as he grapples with the complexities of human nature and the potential for evil. Darkness symbolizes the destructive and morally corrupt aspects of colonialism. The novella criticizes the brutal exploitation of the African people and the land for the sake of imperial interests. The darkness reveals the hypocrisy and greed of the colonizers, who bring destruction and suffering under the guise of civilization and progress. Darkness also represents ambiguity and duality in the novella. Marlowe's experiences in the Congo challenge his understanding of good and evil, right and wrong. He encounters both the potential for greatness and the depths of depravity within individuals. The novella suggests that darkness can exist within everyone and that the line between civilization and savagery is often blurred. Marlowe's journey into the darkness of the Congo parallels a journey inward, as he explores the complexities of his own psyche and confronts his own capacity for darkness. This introspective aspect of the journey adds depth to the novella's exploration of the human condition and the moral challenges of life. In Heart of Darkness, darkness is a multifaceted symbol that encapsulates the unknown, the human soul, colonialism, and the complexities of life. It serves as a central theme in the novella, guiding the narrative and the protagonist's journey. Conrad uses darkness to challenge readers to reflect on the nature of humanity and the potential for darkness within us all.